Hi, I'm Helen, a research assistant here at 23andMe. With me today is Amy Karen of the Lupus Research Institute and Joyce Tung, research director here at 23andMe. Dan Gross of the Lupus Research Institute unfortunately couldn't be with us today. We're going to spend some time today learning about the general challenges and breakthroughs in lupus research, as well as finding out about 23andMe's lupus study. I'll be directing some questions to our panel that we think are of interest to community members, and we'll also be taking some questions from the lupus community through the Hangout. So if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to just type them in the Q&A box, and we'll try to answer as many as possible before our time is up. So Amy, pass it along to you.
Hey, Helen, thank you so much. Again, my name is Amy Karen. I am with the Lupus Research Institute. I'm the project director here for the Teaching Fellows in Lupus project. In a nutshell, the goal of that project is to help providers better recognize and detect lupus in patients so we can shorten the diagnosis time. And I am also a patient with lupus. I've had lupus since I was 23. It's been about like 15 years now. So, you know, this project and certainly being here and everything else that I'm doing here with the organization is super, super exciting for me. So thank you guys for being here and for doing this with us.
And Joyce, could you introduce yourself as well?
Sure. I'm Joyce Tung. I'm Director of Research here at 23andMe. So I lead a team of researchers that studies all sorts of different things, anywhere from skin pigmentation to stretch marks to Parkinson's disease, and of course lupus, which we'll be talking about today. And as an organization, we are really focused on using genetics to help understand disease better so that we can treat it better and also help prevent disease as well. Over the years, we've published over 30 papers. We have a whole bunch of collaborations with different researchers in academia and industry, and we're really excited to talk to everyone today.
Great, thanks Joyce. Amy, we'll start off with you. Could you tell us a little bit more about LRI and what your goals are as an organization?
Yeah, so the Lupus Research Institute was founded in 2000 by people with lupus and their families, along with leading researchers and scientists, because really at the time, as we all know, there really have been no major advancements in treatments or really any kind of understanding of what lupus was. We are the leading private supporter of novel research in lupus, and we're dedicated to stopping the damage caused by lupus and disease progression. So over about 15 years, we've invested $50 million in novel research. We've awarded about 150 grants. 84% of these studies have proven their hypothesis, which is great. And our grantees have gotten an additional $151 million in funding from the National Institutes of Health and other government sources to continue the work under the started under the LRI grant.
Wow, great. And Joyce, could you tell us some more about 23andMe?
Sure. So 23andMe is a direct-to-consumer genetic testing company. So that means that customers can come to our website, order a kit, and then send us a bit of their spit back to us, and we can give them their raw genetic data and also genetic ancestry reports. So at this point, we have over 1 million genotype customers, and over 80% of them have consented to participate in research. So it's pretty straightforward. Anybody can sign up for 23andMe, and they can once they submit their saliva sample to us, they can participate in research for lupus from sort of the comfort of their own home in their pajamas. All they need is a computer.
Great. Diane, let's talk a little bit more about what are some of the challenges that we face with lupus research.
So, still Amy.
Oh, I'm sorry, Amy.
Oh, it's okay, it's okay. So, as we know, lupus is a very complicated disease. It can affect any part of the body. We believe that lupus develops as a result of a combination of genetic factors, numerous environmental exposures, and hormones. So, every person with lupus has a different combination of symptoms, and of course, no two cases are alike. So, really, one of the biggest challenges in research is that research has to sort of cover really the gamut of potential health issues. Another big challenge is that there are not enough people that participate in clinical studies. Really, the only way to get a new treatment approved is by having it tested on patients. And the smaller the study population, the less generalizable those results are to the rest of the community. we need more flexibility in clinical trial design. For instance, some of these lupus trials are designed with such exclusion criteria that the patients that do want to participate, it's actually happened to me several times, it makes it impossible to enroll because many don't qualify. There's also a lack of standardization in methodology and outcomes measures. So what that means is basically you might have a lot of these smaller studies going on, but without a standardized sort of outcome that everyone is looking at, you can't really aggregate all of that data and be able to come up with a conclusion across the board. And funding has been a really big issue. The National Institutes of Health, their budget has been declining, and certainly for complicated diseases like lupus, it's been kind of difficult to get funding. I mean, the Alliance for Lupus Research and the Lupus Research Institute, we can't be the only ones out there funding this research. But the good news is 21st Century Cures, which recently passed in the House, answers a lot of those issues, and hopefully the Senate with their healthier innovations bill. I'm going to completely mess that up, which I just did, but hopefully the Senate follows suit, which they are, so we can advance that and get that to become law, so we can hopefully start addressing some of those.
Mm-hmm. And there might be some people who are watching the Hangout now thinking, why should I participate in research? And along those lines, what are some different ways that I can participate in research? So Amy, what would you say to those people?
I'm going to actually start by reading a quote from one of our active lupus patients here. She's really active with the community, Familial. She said that emotionally, taking part in a trial is very empowering. I feel like I have a sense of responsibility to the lupus community to do everything I can to help everyone dealing with this disease. I'm taking back control over this disease. So I think she really embodies the spirit of it. And again, going back to how clinical trials work, the smaller the population in these trials, the less, not to say less useful, but the less applicable those results are to the community. So the more people that are in the study, the greater impact on the results. It's important to know that not all trials require taking any kind of medication. There are trials like observational studies that might be a survey to just learn more about you, and that might help guide in a trial design. And certainly if you participate in this study, this is an observational study, and that these studies, they're very, very little risk to patients, but they can be hugely impactful. Interventional studies are a little bit different. Usually that is, you're either taking a new treatment or participating in some kind of intervention, and understandably they, can feel a little bit more riskier to patients. So that's, there's a group that's receiving some kind of treatment or intervention, and they're compared to a group that is not receiving it. But the positive sides of participating in an interventional study, it could really give you as a patient access to a novel treatment that won't be ready for mass consumption until long down the road, and we've seen in the past that can really transform patients' lives. Of course, there's never any promises, so I think the biggest thing to take away from this is when you're thinking about participating in any kind of clinical trial or any kind of study, is read the educational material, take your time with it, ask the questions of the study staff. They should be able to answer any and all questions that you might have to feel comfortable. Again, it is important that you feel comfortable, but the study team should be able to help you through any of the questions. But in the end, really, as patients, it's important that we participate, because without us, we're not going to find a cure, we're not going to find new treatments.
Mm-hmm. Joyce, could you tell us some more about what 23andMe's lupus study is about?
Sure. So this study is trying to answer two main questions. So first of all, why do people get lupus? Are there genetic factors that influence whether people are going to develop lupus or not? And the second question is, how should people be treated? Can we find and sort of tailor the right treatments to people based on their sort of genetic predispositions? So, I mean, currently not much is known about what causes lupus, but there's actually quite a bit of evidence to suggest that genetic factors play a role. And so our sort of web-based research platform enables like a really large group of individuals from all over the world to provide valuable data for research. And so basically what we're doing is we take the genetic information that people are contributing and adding to get to it this information that they get from that they provide via surveys, and we put it together to try to learn how do genetics impact the disease. Conducting research using these data may help improve diagnosis. That's our hope, and also help develop better treatments.
Mm-hmm. And what does someone need to do to participate in the 23andMe lupus study?
So it's pretty straightforward. First, you come to the website, and that's where you enroll, and you do all the participation there. And you start off by responding to a short questionnaire that ensures that you're actually eligible to participate in the study. And then at that point, you can provide your physician's contact information, which allows us to obtain your medical records for the study. And then, as we talked about before, you provide a DNA sample, which is through your saliva. It's a little tube that you spit in, and then we keep this saliva and DNA stored for analysis in our laboratory. And then the final steps are completing 7 short online surveys about your experience with lupus, and these are administered over the course of a year. So the questions include things about your diagnosis, your treatment, your symptoms, your medications, your family history. And we'll let you know when to take these surveys by email, and we may send reminders and call you if you're having trouble remembering.
And what are some of the benefits that participants get from participating in this study?
We talked a little bit before about the things that people get through the 23andMe service. So you can learn about your genetic ancestry of where you're from. So for example, my husband is Mexican, and he learned that he's 3/4 European and 1/4 Native American. You can also take a direct role in research, and I think, as Amy alluded to before, a lot of people talk about how it's a really empowering experience to sort of take some control over what's happening. And as I mentioned before, you get to participate from your home, so you don't have to, travel a long distance to a site and wait around. You can do this at 2 in the afternoon. You can do it at 2 in the morning, whatever's more convenient to you. And also, we will endeavor to keep you informed on a regular basis as the study progresses. So we feel that it's important that you don't just sort of throw your data into a giant black hole and then never find out what happens.
And where can participants find more information about the 23andMe study?
So 23andme.com/lupus.
Great. Amy, to bring this back to lupus research in general, what is some of the most promising research that you're currently seeing around lupus?
Well, on this note, I'll start by saying, given the evidence that genetics play a role, of course, the 23andMe study it really is exciting. I actually sat here at my desk yesterday with my back turned to the door and did my sibling the tube. And of course, I am in New York, so I sent it off to my mom in Massachusetts, and my mom is going to get it off to you guys. So that's really, really super exciting. I'm so glad that I can participate. Aside from that, there is some work by oncologist and immunologist Dr. Tyler Curiel. He is an LRI-sponsored researcher who just received additional $1 million in government funding to continue the work. And he was looking particularly at how estrogen can interfere with the body's healthy immune function. I took the pill for many, many years, and when I stopped, my lupus was much better controlled. I mean, it's a woman's disease, so that makes sense. Overall, I mean, there are over 70 investigational drugs that are approved for other uses that are being looked at for lupus. This is drug repurposing, and there are about 125 clinical trials aiming to better understand lupus and to improve the disease and related complications.
And are there any recent breakthroughs that we should know about?
Well, I think the biggest one is certainly Benlysta. I mean, although it only works for a small subset of the population, it's been the only drug approved in the last 50 years. I was really excited to see a study released last year showing that for 70% of the lupus patients in the study that had been in remission, it was possible to stop immunosuppressant therapy for at least 2 years without triggering a flare, and over half went for 3 years with no flare. So these are patients that hadn't had any flare-ups and were just on what the the doctors may call maintenance drugs. So it's understandable that a rheumatologist is going to be weary to taper or take any of their patients off of these maintenance drugs. But it's good to see that there is actually more and more data being collected that's showing that it's safe for patients. New studies by several of the LRI investigators show that women with lupus whose symptoms are under control can actually have very healthy, good pregnancies, which is certainly great for all of us. And researchers at the University of Cambridge, I think it was partly funded by the LRI, just published results showing that artificially exhausting certain immune cells so that they're too tired to attack the body could provide a way to help stop lupus damage and progression. So that's important because instead of taking a generalized immunosuppressant therapy that just suppresses the immune system as a whole, it's very specialized to those that are really impactful for lupus.
Great. And Joyce, what is 23andMe hoping to find from collecting DNA samples from people with lupus?
So we really hope to enhance lupus research by bringing together a really large group of people to understand how genetics affects disease, progression, symptoms, treatment. I mean, I think big numbers are key in order to have the statistical power to find things, especially if you're going to be looking at like different subgroups. And again, as we talked about before, really trying to expand the geographic reach of the study. Using, sort of leveraging the accessibility of the internet to do that. And then finally, sort of removing some of the time and cost barriers to participation in research. Again, like you don't have to live in a particular place right next to a clinical study site. If you're busy during the day, you participate where it's convenient and you don't have to travel anywhere.
Yeah, that's great. So now it's about halfway through our Hangout, so we'll take a quick break for some questions from the community that have been coming in. So the first one here, we kind of already addressed this a little bit, but how is 23andMe finding individuals that have lupus to volunteer for research? Who should people contact if they are interested in participating? So interested participants can visit our website at www.23andme.com/lupus. If they have questions about participating, they can feel free to email us at lupus-help@23andme.com. And now I'll take another question. Joyce, this would be for you. How many lupus participants have been enrolled so far in this lupus genetic study?
So as of now, we have over 1,400 people enrolled already, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Pretty excited so far.
Great. And another question for you, Joyce. Are you enrolling patients with lupus antibodies who don't yet have a complete diagnosis, like a diagnosis of undifferentiated connective tissue disease in which there are lupus antibodies but not enough symptom to meet lupus criteria?
Okay, I'm going to have to double check with our study coordinator on this one. So the question is whether are we enrolling people that do not have a definitive diagnosis of lupus yet, even though they have some of the antibodies? Okay, so yeah, so the answer is you do at this point have to have a definitive diagnosis of lupus in order to enroll, and that will be confirmed by medical records.
Great, thanks, Joyce. Throwing you a couple curveballs there.
Right. Fancy words.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see what else. Will questions in the survey focus on diet, environment, and other factors apart from disease?
So the question is, will the survey focus on things like diet, environment, and other sort of non-genetic factors of the disease?
There are environmental factors. We're still developing the final survey.
Okay, so just double checking with the project coordinator again. So we are still developing the final surveys, but they will include some of these sort of non-genetic factors that may influence the development and progression of the disease.
Great, thanks. So we'll go back to some more questions, and then we can take some more of the Hangout questions towards the end. So Amy, why do you think the estimates of lupus prevalence vary so greatly? How many people do we think are believed to have lupus, and how many do we think are undiagnosed?
So the estimates for lupus prevalence, that's the number of people with lupus, varies from 355,000 to 1.5 million people, and I think a big reason for that is the differences in the way studies are conducted. Again, without a standardized methodology and the way of looking at things, one small study here is going to be very different to something that comes out over here, and you can't really look at those as a whole to make it generalizable across the country. In order to get a better idea of prevalence and incidence, that's the number of new cases. The Centers for Disease Control, they're funded Lupus Registries project. So there are 5 sites, that's Georgia, Michigan, California, New York City, and the Indian Health Service that are developing these lupus registries. And the biggest thing there is that they're all using the same protocol to collect the data, verify the cases. So once all of the results are published, I think it's Atlanta, Michigan, and the Indian Health Service have published their results so far. And the projects here in New York City and in San Francisco are just wrapping up. But once we can look at all of that data for all of those sites together, then we can start maybe answering the questions of how many might be undiagnosed and how many people might be believed to have lupus. But again, it's very tricky to get to those numbers, but these registries are the best first start.
And why is lupus so hard to diagnose?
The biggest thing is that there's no single laboratory test that gives a definitive answer of lupus or not. And there isn't even a widely accepted standardized screening for lupus. So to diagnose lupus, it's generally a rheumatologist that looks at a combination of physical exam results, lab results, certainly family history. And to be diagnosed, someone must meet 4 of 11 criteria that have been established by the American College of Rheumatology. But when you speak to a rheumatologist about those that criteria, sometimes they, well, that was really created for research. So because every case is so very different, it's generally a case-by-case basis with by a rheumatologist to look at everything. So there's really just no definitive step-by-step process to diagnose. Lupus is known as the great masquerader, and that means it mimics everything from viral syndromes, depression, and it overlaps with a lot of other things. And symptoms can come on fairly easily. They can be quite acute, and they can change over time. So a patient that keeps going to the doctor with these things, this is it's called a somatizer, right? Oftentimes doctors, when there's no reason or origin for it, over time they might start to be like, okay, dismiss the patient a little bit more. It's like there's just so many challenges to that, the way that lupus sort of works with the flares up and down, and it's so difficult to pinpoint. I think among providers, we call them frontline providers, because when you get sick, you either see your primary care physician. If it's acute, you may go to the emergency room, and these are the providers that are really going to be the gateway for that patient to get to the specialist. So these are the ones that really need to be able to recognize the symptoms of lupus, and oftentimes those providers may have only gotten about an hour at most of education throughout all of their medical school career. So how do we expect them in practice to be thinking about something that they have very little training on? And this is where the project that we're working on comes in, the Teaching Fellows in Lupus project. We just finished our pilot year. We piloted in 4 cities, and in a nutshell, we worked with rheumatology fellows. Those are doctors, but they're rheumatologists in training, and we sent them out into the community to teach some frontline providers. That's anybody under that primary care umbrella. It could be the nurse, the physician assistant. And we gave them a really quick seminar on how to recognize lupus, and the data that we have so far looks really great. So, and the Lupus Initiative from the American College of Rheumatology, there's tons of great resources there, and slowly but surely we're increasing the amount of education that these providers get in medical school. So there's a lot of great changes there to address that particular issue. Healthcare systems issues also contribute. There is a bit of a shortage of rheumatologists nationally. So oftentimes what may happen is, if I'm a primary care provider, for instance, and I suspect that my patient has lupus, it might be a 6-month wait to get them to the rheumatologist, or there might not be a rheumatologist in their area that patient can get to. So that just, again, increases the time that it takes to get that patient that diagnosis. I think the biggest thing is, well, there are a lot of big things, but loss of follow-up by patients. I think lupus, sometimes there's still a lot of myths out there about lupus, which actually very recently when I told someone that I had it, they asked me if it was contagious. And I think it has a very tumultuous recent history, so there's a lot of fear around it from the patient side. So sometimes if a doctor mentions that this is what it might be, then it's, I don't want to follow up. That's very scary. Or it could be, lack of insurance to get to specialty care. There's a lot of things there that might be contributing as well to making the diagnosis hard.
Mm-hmm. And is it getting any easier to diagnose lupus?
I'm going to say yes, and I use the 5-year survival rate. So in 1953, it was 50%, a 5-year survival rate. And when I told my grandmother 15 years ago, or however long it's been now, that I had lupus, I mean, she was inconsolable with just crying. In her day, lupus really was a death sentence. So now the 5-year survival rate with a diagnosis, the recent diagnosis is 90%. And when you think that there hasn't been a ton of new treatments for lupus, we could say that hopefully an earlier diagnosis is enabling us to avoid the long-term consequences of organ damage accrual that really has contributed to a lot of the mortality rates in lupus. So I think hopefully it's, in some ways, it's getting easier to diagnose by using sort of that statistic. I think given the improvements in technology, I mean, I know we're probably all seeing a lot more computers in our doctor's offices, and that's important because it's going to enable us to better track data over time, better track our personal histories, our health histories. It's going to enable better information sharing between providers, so certainly lab work that you've taken before that might be giving an indication of some kind of disease activity is going to be easily shared with other doctors that might be able to catch it when another doctor didn't. I think definitely more knowledgeable and active participatory patients with increased access to health insurance, and that's going to help as well. And I think there's more openness by the provider community to increase their cultural competency and communication skills, because again, so much of this is, it's like, I just don't feel right, or it's a really difficult disease to try to pinpoint. So I think doctors are also doing their part to improve their skills and being able to recognize a complex disease like this.
Mm-hmm. Well, now we'll take some more questions from the community that have been coming in. And Joyce, this one is for you. Do you have a good representation in the study from all racial/ethnic groups?
So I don't think I have the breakdowns of that specifically in terms of what the ethnic breakdowns are, but we definitely take, we're definitely looking to get diversity in ethnic representation. It's really important for, I think, genetic studies to have that as well. So I think that's something that we'll be able to report on as we get more data back to the participants in the study.
Great, thank you. And then one other question. Joyce, this is a tough one. How can we tell which lupus genes are familial?
Oh, that is an interesting question. Well, a little bit of that is going to depend on the study design. So, I mean, to some extent, because you inherit your genes from your parents, right? To some extent, all of these things can run in families, right? But there's a concept called penetrance, which means that, like, just because you carry like a genetic variant that might predispose you to developing a particular condition, it may not actually happen in you, right? So there's some other factors that may be involved in determining whether you actually develop the disease or not. So, I mean, usually when we say that something is familial, it's because the sort of the genetic variant that is causing the disease is like highly penetrant. That means like most of the people that have it will develop the disease, and so then you'll see it run in families. So even with the kind of study that we're doing here, which is more of like sort of a genome-wide association study on a population, you should be able to find things that have these really highly, like these really strong effects, and in that case you might see it tend to run in families. The other way that people tend to look for things that run in families is to actually collect people from those families, right? Some of the challenges there is that sometimes these variants that can cause the disease are super rare. So they're really hard to find, and on top of that, they may not apply to other people. So sometimes you'll see these genetic variants that only occur in like basically that one family. So I mean, I think those kinds of studies are they have their strengths and their weaknesses. I think they can help you understand more about the biology of the disease, and that's really helpful for developing treatments. They are sometimes a little bit less helpful in risk prediction, that is, in helping sort of the population in general understand whether they are going to be at risk of developing the disease.
Great, thank you, Joyce. And just one last question, and I'm actually not sure if this is specifically for the 23andMe lupus study or directed at LRI. Any plans to collaborate with any of the accelerating medicines partnerships with NIH, such as PJ Utz at Stanford? So Joyce, would you, I guess, maybe start off with whether the 23andMe lupus study is planning to collaborate with the accelerating medicines partnership?
So I think the first stage of the project will be to sort of execute the project as planned. I think in terms of collaborating with other partners, I think after we sort of finish the data collection and the analysis, then we'll have an opportunity to determine whether there are additional opportunities for collaboration. I mean, a lot of the ways that we think about these sort of research communities kinds of projects is that the group of people, you know, continues on, right? So that you can actually, as long as they continue to be interested, we can do multiple studies with them. So I think there's, you know, great opportunities to collaborate down the line.
Great, thanks. And then, Amy, is the Accelerating Medicines partnerships with the NIH something that LRI is working with?
Not that I know of, but we're very open to collaboration, and we certainly discuss possibilities with a range of folks, but definitely outside of scope for me.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for answering our questions today, and thank you for everyone for joining us on the Google Hangout. If you have any more questions, please feel free to email us at lupus-help@23andme.com. We'll also try to answer questions in the comments that are made on this video. Thanks again to Amy from the Lupus Research Institute, and thank you to Joyce. Bye, everyone.